which in itself very comprehensively challenges each of us to utilize critical thinking, empathy, creativity, problem solving, public speaking skills, and debating, all of it at once, while, rather than just compelling you to exercise just one skill at one point in time. So this MUN or model UN leads you to have an immersive experience in which you're not only exercising these skills, but while you do that, you solve global issues and you start exploring your own self, uh, and understanding how do I behave in a group setting. Am I a good debater, or am I somebody who loves to negotiate with people in groups? Am I somebody who is good at just speaking, or am I someone who can structure solutions, who can write these kind of languages? So model UN really, I always say that there is no fixed path in a model UN to do well. You can create your own path, and you can always utilize the strengths you have as you develop other areas. So I'd love to hear from you in the chat as well. And again, once again, I thank everyone for introducing yourselves in the chat. What are the skills that you would like to, gain through the session we are doing? So I'd love for you to put them in, even if you want to put it in a single word in a chat. And maybe what is it that you already are good with? Because we are not here to just teach you. We are here to create an environment where all of us can learn from each other. So that's something that I'd really request you all to do in the chat. Now, the final point is about civic engagement. I think Model UN is your first step in an academic environment where you are not concerned just about physics, chemistry, academic learning of a subject. This is your starting point to learn about civic issues, which the world is looking at, and actually trying to find solutions to them rather than simply learning unidirectionally. We are not only here dialoguing, but eventually we are trying to come out with certain outcomes. So that is largely what I would say is a model UN. And again, like, you can put your observations, your ideas to what I'm saying in the chat so that I can pick on these relevant, whatever you're saying. We can also discuss some of that here. Okay, so thank you so much. Next slide, please. Okay, all right. So thank you once again for the next slide. And I see a question. How can green technology positively influence climate change? I think this is a very important question. But I'd say that this is something that we together have to find this out through this Model UN exercise that we will be doing. So keep your questions coming. We will be documenting all of them. And eventually, as the time comes, the right time, we will start addressing these as well. Okay. So, Nirmala, thank you for your response about public speaking skills, program coordination, and management. Indeed, I think these are some things which are intrinsically tied to participating as well as organizing MUN. So thank you so much for your response. Just coming quickly to the benefits of Model UN. Now, so the first is that we are being acquainted with the global issues. So I think one unique thing about a model UN is that usually when we are studying about issues, we are always studying them from the perspective of an academician or somebody who's just reading about these issues. What a model UN does is it it challenges you to understand the issue from the perspective of different countries and different stakeholders. That dynamic of trying to address it through different stakeholders, that puts you in the real world. And that tells you that maybe the solution to a problem seems very evident, but looking at it from one particular country's perspective, that may not be the case. I think the same thing with climate change as well. uh, so that is one aspect of particularly global issues. Nurturing public speaking, developing diplomacy and negotiation skills. Again, like, these are things which are absolutely intrinsic uh, intrinsic to Model UN. You will be utilizing them and experiencing them as well. Finally, enhancing leadership skills. So this is where all of you will be able to exercise your leadership skills. You will have to, there is no fixed leader in a group, so you have the potential to emerge out as a leader of a particular block, which is trying to negotiate, for instance, funding for climate technologies, climate friendly technologies. Maybe you are leading a block of developing countries which are saying that developed countries has had enough of growth, and now it is the time for developing countries. So a lot of this requires you to exercise leadership skills, and then while you exercise these leadership skills, implement your research, your teamwork, your negotiation abilities, and writing skills. So this is broadly what I can say about the benefits of a model UN. Let's move to the next slide, please. And I think Mabel, Joyce, Joseph, I think if you are able to, I think our sound is working. You're requested to please restart your device and just check it. And in case some of you can give me a thumbs up, I hope that you can hear me. It'll be good. Yeah, okay. I see the thumbs up. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I really like all of you already. All right. So now, what are the different roles that we see in a model UN? There are, as you see on the screen, there are four distinct roles that we see, and this is when all of us now need to start getting used to the terminologies that we will be using. So the first role is what we call as the secretariat. The secretariat of the Model UN essentially is the team that organizes the Model UN itself. Much like in the United Nations, we have the Secretariat, which is led by the Secretary General of the United Nations. Uh, the Secretariat in a Model UN really sets the whole context for what a Model UN intends to do. And these MUNs are hosted by universities, they're hosted by schools. And I'm very happy to share with you that UNISA and DIAS, all of us, we will be hosting a mock simulation as well at the end. And we would love for some of you to join us as Secretariat members in organizing that simulation. Um, okay. Now, and that requires a lot of organizing ability. Somebody had mentioned project management. I think that's a skill that you directly implement very well in this role. The next role that we see is what we call as a delegate. And now this, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very, very important term. Throughout the once you're assigned a country, then you have to refer to yourself as the delegate of XYZ. Like so, if I'm from India, for instance, and if I'm allocated India, I would say that the delegate of India would like to present their perspective on this particular matter. The delegate of South Africa would like to convey to the August gathering about XYZ initiatives that we have taken on climate change. So, and you are also referring to others also as delegates. One protocol that we should always follow in a model UN is always to add the word honorable. And that protocol you will see often in even the parliaments or legislative houses. You will see that in courts as well. So honorable delegate. So whenever you have to refer to each other, you can do that by saying honorable delegate or honorable representative. So that is the second role. The third role that we see is what we call as the chairperson, chair, or director. These are the people who are governing your discussion, who are moderating your discussion, who are also judging the people, like deciding the awards process for the whole Model UN. These are also the people who are preparing the research documents that everyone's reading. So their role is important. And this role is usually taken on by by young people who have been delegates in MUNs before and who have excelled at the activity. So this is a very important role, and this chairperson or a director is supported by a group of two more people, two to three more people, and collectively, and they could be called as a vice chairperson, a deputy director, and so on. And this group is collectively called as the executive board. So the executive board is that body which is regulating everything in an MUN. So very quickly, if we are to summarize this, we have the secretariat, which organizes everything. We have the delegates, which debate and represent different countries in a conversation. And we have the executive board, which is moderating this conversation, which is judging this conversation. So I hope that all of us are again clear on this. If you have any questions, please feel free to write on the chat. Please do not hesitate at any points. All right then. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, important terms in an MUN. Again, I would really want you all to focus very well on this particular slide because all of these words that we are going to be learning are utilized in model UNs across the world. Wherever you have English language, the same words you will find in India, you will find in South Africa, you will find in the United Kingdom, you will find them in the USA. So you are able to, once you learn these phrases, you will be, and they are also, by the way, utilized at the United Nations itself. So that is why whatever we are discussing right now, these are global best practices, everyone. So the first topic, the first word that we see on the screen is what we call as the agenda. An agenda is the topic of discussion. So that means that our MOOC is focused on green technologies for climate change. So that, in a sense, becomes the agenda of the conversation. Similarly, in other MUNs, if the topic pertains to the crisis in the Middle East, the situation in Palestine, for instance, or a trade based issue, so agenda is essentially the phrasing of that particular topic that is discussed in a MUN. The second is again very important. This is called as a committee. So a committee means that body which is actually being simulated at the UN, at an MUN. So I will give you a quick example. Usually an MUN, if it is, let's say, some universities organizing their MUN, they will divide their entire MUN into different committees or different bodies or forums which will be running parallelly in different venues, in different lecture halls, auditoriums, and so on. These so each of this hall, each of this place where the discussion is taking place is called a committee. This committee can be the United Nations General Assembly, it can be the Security Council, it can be a World Health Organization, it can be UNESCO. Any of these kind of bodies and more can be the committees. So each MUN has committees. Those committees have a pre-assigned agenda, agenda being the topic. And finally, they have delegates like all of us, yourselves, who debate that agenda in that particular committee. Okay, so I hope that that is clear to all of us. If it is, I'd love to see some expressions or emoticons with which you can communicate that to me. Um, and maybe I would absolutely love it if you can give us some committee ideas, like is there some committee specifically you would like to participate in? I think that will be very helpful to us. So you can put them in the chat as well. Any UN bodies that you think we should simulate in the future. So we will take all of these suggestions also into account. Yeah, okay. So this is the most important three words. Now the next word that we see is called as a speakers list. And then we see a moderated caucus and an unmoderated caucus. These three words, these three phrases are basically different formats in which the debate happens in a model UN. We will be discussing these in more detail in the future, so I will not dwell a lot into it. But this word called the speakers list and a caucus, these words we should start just familiarizing ourselves with. Okay. Um, I see. Thank you so much. I do see somebody has mentioned that they are fascinated by the Security Council. So thank you for mentioning that. I think Security Council constitutes as a very frequent committee in Model UN simulations. So thank you. And you can even actually mention to me any topics that you think can be interesting for these committees. I think that will be great as well. Sports. Okay, I think for sports, for instance, you can easily do a FIFA committee for those of you who love football. Even an international Olympic committee can be organized in that sense for discussing Olympics. We just got done with them, and Paralympics are happening. So these kind of even football committees, I mean, the committees can also happen. Lovely. I love this idea. Conference of Parties, COP. COP is is Conference of Parties, which happens every year on more interestingly climate change. There was a COP. There's a COP happening in November now. I think in Azerbaijan in Baku. So that's great. Keep your suggestions coming in. This is wonderful. Thank you for all your suggestions. And finally, I'll just focus on the last word, which is called as a block. Blocks are those alliances that countries together create in a model UN to negotiate a common position. So, for instance, I was earlier talking about how developing countries sometimes come together to discuss climate change, or sometimes we have like for instance this Israel Palestine issue that is going on. There are some countries which are together negotiating in a pro Palestinian space. Some countries are together trying to negotiate a pro Israeli situation. Some people are have another position. So these countries which work together, they are called as a bloc in a model UN. So you have to then start finding out which blocks can you belong to. All right. So thank you once again. Keep getting your suggestions in. Now, the final slide in this segment that we are discussing is what we call as a flow of debate. This is a flow of debate basically is to tell you that when we start a model UN, we start with something called as a roll call or an attendance. So this we know what a roll call is. I think we all understand that a roll call is when you tell the committee that you're present. So first we take into account and understand who all is present in the meeting in a particular committee. Then officially the committee itself adopts the agenda. As I had mentioned earlier, that the agenda is the discussion, the topic of the main discussion. Thereafter, we start the debate, and I had mentioned to you these two words: the speakers list and the caucus. So this is the format in which the debate takes place. This constitutes really the more core of the debate and dialogue in an MUN. So these debates happen in these two formats. Usually, it's like a speakers list, which means we create a list of speakers where everyone is assigned a particular time, and then they speak. And then we have these focused group discussions, which is a caucus, in which we take on sub themes of the main issue and then we develop consensus on them thematically. Once all of that takes place, we take solutions from each of these sub themes, and then countries create blocks and they write these solutions down as proposals, which we also call as resolutions. And then there is a debate on the resolutions, and finally, through a consensus or voting, these resolutions are adopted. So, this whole process of a flow of debate, this whole process is called as the flow of debate. How the debate flows from point A, which is the starting point, uh, and then how finally it converts itself into a consensus or a resolution. In our next sessions, we will continue to discuss what happens in a speakers list, what happens in caucuses, and for those of you who have been already studying the modules on the website, I'm sure you're already coming across a lot of theoretical context of what we're talking about right now. Okay. Before I move further, I think let me also acknowledge some of the other themes which have been brought in. We have seen youth health and wellness. I think again extremely important. Journalism, misinformation, safety of journalists, freedom of press. So many important themes that can be discussed in a model UN. Social entrepreneurship, again, critical theme for resolving many of these SDGs. Um, you can also then look at yeah, so social entrepreneurship, business and society. Great. um, One question that has come is, can we find the flow of debate and some of these examples on YouTube? Yes, most certainly. What we can probably do is, as a follow-up to the email, we will put in certain lists, but I think in the important links of the course itself that David will be showing you, we have already mentioned and embedded certain videos. So you can also refer to those videos. You will find, Adrian, those videos as well. Uh, what does SDG 13 mean? I'm referring again to the chat here. SDG 13 is SDG is what we call as the Sustainable Development Goals. Again, thank you so much, Budu, for mentioning that. As I was saying, these are the goals that were adopted by the United Nations in 2015. Uh, there are 17 goals in total, and they have been numbered. The 13 is called as climate action, and this is what the central focus of our theme is. So SDG means Sustainable Development Goal, and 13th goal is climate action. Similarly, you have different goals, like 5 is gender equality, 4 is quality education, and so on. So I think it'll be very nice if you're able to just read a little bit about the different SDGs. And again, like, we have covered SDGs in our module as well, so that'll be great. And again, like, war crimes commission, again, very important, right from Nuremberg trials after Second World War to the most recent examples. ICC is trying to prosecute different countries. Human rights, they're all great topics for Model UN. So thank you so much for bringing those in. Let's move to our next topic. All right. So now we have done a very basic overview of what a model UN is, what the process sounds like, and now we will have a quick discussion on the United Nations. Um, Before I start on that, I'd like to ask all of you if you can put some words in the chat as a response. What does the word united mean to you? Like, when you hear the word united, what comes to your mind generally? Like, what comes to my mind sometimes is Manchester United, or Leeds United, or all these football clubs. They all have United next to them. Okay, togetherness, wonderful. Oneness. Okay, being together. All right. Everyone working towards a common goal. Unity, collective action. Ubuntu, lovely. I think that's brilliant. Um, okay. So thank you, everyone. Keep these responses coming. Uh, Multilateral. Okay, these are all extremely important phrases and words that you're talking about. And it also shows that when we hear the word united, there are so many different sort of components to it, dimensions to it, and perspectives on it. So this is amazing. Um, so the word united is all of what you're talking about, and then the word nation. I think South Africa is a brilliant example when Nelson Mandela talked about South Africa being a rainbow nation. So we will eventually go into a discussion on what is a nation as well. Uh, but these are great words you're already talking about. Um, so within the United Nations, we will be discussing a brief overview of the organization that is the UN. We will discuss a little bit about its functions, briefly about its structure, its membership, something about the UN Charter and the international law. So these are all contextually the kind of information that will be helpful to all of you. One thing I would definitely say is UN.org. I've put it in the chat. This is something that's the website of the UN that I would definitely encourage you to visit and browse through whenever you have the time. to do that. Okay. So, all right. So let's go to the next slide, please. Okay. So the United Nations is an international organization. It started in 1945. So this is we are approaching the 79th, 80th year of the UN after the devastation of the World War II. The first goal of the United Nations was maintenance of international peace and security. Very interestingly, there is we will go through this UN Charter together, which is the treaty on which the UN is formulated, and it starts with something like this. It says, "We the peoples of the United Nations." It doesn't say "we the nations," it says "we the peoples." So the very power of the United Nations, the agency, is vested in all of us. That is the peoples of the United Nations. And it talks about how we have seen, incredible, untold sorrows of the mankind in destruction in the World War II and the World War One, which is why we are now coming together to make sure there isn't a World War III. So that is the primary purpose that it started with. Um, as it moved forward, it also became the platform to discuss global issues such as human rights, humanitarian aid, sustainable development. Um, it started with 51 members, and now we have 193 member states in the UN, and it operates through a very, very huge structure that has evolved over the last 80 years. The main bodies in the UN include the General Assembly, the Security Council, as somebody had also mentioned in the chat, the International Court of Justice, the Economic and Social Council. Each of these different bodies have assigned specific roles. And each of these bodies are also very often simulated in the model UN. So you will always hear of these as different committees in the UN. Um, is the UN successful or not successful? And why do you think so? If any of you wants to share in the chat, again, we are very happy to hear your opinions in the chat. Okay, let's move forward, please. Functions. So the basic, if we are to look at the most important, like broader functions of the UN, uh, to start with, as I said, maintenance of international peace and security. So to prevent conflict where a conflict is happening, to look at the disputes and mediating them, trying to mediate them, looking at peacekeeping missions wherever possible. So this is something that the UN's core function starts with, and the UN Security Council is given that role usually to look into these issues. There we have promoting human rights. I think that to me personally is one of the most important things that the UN can do, which is to look at human rights globally through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, monitoring the violations, um, supporting the development of human rights standards, and providing assistance to nations to uphold these rights. Uh, we have one response. The UN has been successful with some great and empowering projects and programs. So thank you, Nirmala, for your comment. And again, like all opinions are welcome as long as they are respectfully communicated. Please do bring in more opinions. It's the dialogue part of Model UN, which is the most important for all of us. So let's have that dialogue in the chat. Um, Fostering economic development. So, social and economic development is a very, very important part, whether it's poverty alleviation or improving education. One can even argue that if you don't elevate poverty and improve education, then how do you even enforce human rights and how do you uplift people's status of human rights? So both these issues, I think, go hand in hand, key issues of the UN. And this is also now being done through the Sustainable Development Goals. And the Sustainable Development Goals came after the Millennium Development Goals, which started under the previous Secretary General Kofi Annan's time. So these are some of the vital functions. Trade and investment as well, I think, yes. Uh, okay. Yes, we do have. I think David is there from the team on the. So I think David can take your request on the chat as well. Thank you for your comment. Let's move to the next slide, please. Yeah. Okay. Now moving forward on the functions, I think again, like providing humanitarian assistance, very, very important part. Whether it's during natural disasters or conflicts, this is a very important part of what the UN does. And many of its agencies, offices like the UNHCR, the High Commissioner for Refugees, World Food Program, a lot of them have been doing a lot of this effort. Upholding international law. International law is something that organizes and governs the relationship of countries with each other. Like what can they do, what can they not do, and upholding. And we need one body which across the world which looks into that. Like how we have the Supreme Court in South Africa. Similarly, we have Supreme Court in India. And at the UN level, we have the international law being governed by the International Court of Justice. Um, okay. In the meantime, there are some really fascinating opinions coming in. UN is somewhat successful, not evenly represented when it comes to veto, for instance, within the Security Council. I think it's a very, very fair assessment. So thank you for that comment. And India and South Africa, I think both in that context have been advocating for reforms of the Security Council. So it's a very, very on point thing that you have made. Thank you for your comment. The final last point here in the functions is promoting multilateral cooperation. This is all of you a very important aspect that I think we all will have to understand that the UN many times, we are blaming the UN for not being able to do anything on many issues, right? But the UN can only operate when the member states will allow it to operate. Uh, and that is where multilateral cooperation means cooperation between all the countries and different stakeholders. So UN creates that one dialogue where all the countries can come, talk to each other, communicate, and then develop common responses. Like climate change, disarmament, COVID-19 pandemic. The latest issue that the UN is also trying to tackle with is the artificial intelligence, and now how do you deal with it in a responsible way? So the UN really like tries to put its hands into all these different issues around the world. Okay, so let's move forward. Um, Now this is very important for all of us to understand, and I can tell you that many times we think we know about the UN, but as we together understand the structure of the UN, we will see there's so much that we are yet to know. One of the reasons I was very particular about this slide was also that a lot of these, what you are hearing, what you will be hearing now, are also job opportunities potentially, where you can actually apply for internships, you can work with these bodies in the future. So don't just look at this as a exposure for model UN. You can, all of these bodies have different websites which offer internships, projects, research opportunities, so much more. So I will actively request you all to think about your careers as well in many of these places. Um, yeah. Okay. So one of this. So the first thing that we see is what we call as the principal organs of the UN. The principal organ of the UN are the General Assembly, Security Council, the Economic and Social Council. These are the most important bodies with the most amount of power to deal with issues. This is where we have all different countries have memberships, and they are all able to communicate with each other, and they adopt solutions through different consensus building actions. The second is what we call as agencies, specialized agencies. And here, all of you, this is very important, that a specialized agency is what we call as an autonomous international organization. This means that they have somewhat more freedom than the principal organs in directly intervening in issues, like a World Health Organization sometimes or a UNESCO. These bodies directly continue their program, and they are more on the implementational aspect of the UN's work. Then you have different UN programs. Uh, then you have different programs which are looking into humanitarian aid, environmental protection. So, for instance, the UN Environment Program, UN Development Program. So, those are also there. It's a very interesting question. Are the Bretton Woods agencies a part of the UN? I definitely. Both the World Bank and IMF are crucial to the functioning of the UN, and one can even argue that without their support, a lot of what the UN does cannot happen because you need financing of this. And for all of those who do not know what Bretton Woods agencies are, they are referring to specifically the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. So again, important institutions, and I don't know if you knew about this or not. Bretton Woods institutions, the World Bank and the IMF, were very crucial in the consultations of implementing the Millennium Development Goals. And because the Millennium Development Goals were already funded by the Bretton Woods agencies, as you mentioned, uh, one can argue that they were far more successful than the SDGs, because with SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, a lot of funding issues have not been addressed. So thank you for mentioning your comment there. Uh, let's look at the next slide, please. Okay, so then you have these UN tribunals, you have judicial bodies, you have several UN funds and schemes. Then you have UN mechanisms, which are essentially framework and processes. For instance, you have the peace building mechanism in the UN and so on. So, and then there are other non-related UN activities, entities such as research institutions and so on. There's a UN university as well for all those who are interested. And a fun fact: the head of the UN university right now is a South African academician. I don't know if you knew this or not. UN university is led by a South African academician currently. You may want to email him at some point. Uh, so, how can we apply for the UN internships? Every UN office has a a website, and they all have a career section where all of them can you can apply. Usually, the application requires you to have a master's degree in one of the disciplines. There are certain other portals also on LinkedIn and so on that you can find these UN job postings which come across. There's something also called as I'm just putting it in the chat, a YPP, which is a Young Professionals Program. You can, again, I'll actively ask you to like go through some of these UN websites, and there's tons of opportunities you can find. And then UN also has regional offices, where I think which is more flexible in getting interns from different educational levels. So you can do that. Um, as student, I'll take one more question before we move further. As students and researchers, how do we fit into the climate change resolution under the UN? What exactly is our role that you can expand on that? Okay, I will take this question in the coming time. So just let's hold that question for momentarily. Let's move to the next slide, please. Membership. Okay. UN has, I cannot be a member of the UN. So individual membership in the UN does not exist. The countries get membership into the UN. And those are called as member states once you become a part of the UN. And the membership is open to any peace-loving state or a peace-loving country that accepts the obligations of the UN Charter. And new members are admitted by the General Assembly. The General Assembly is that one body where every 193 countries are a part of it, and everyone holds an equal vote. But this is the most democratic body within the United Nations. Uh, let's move further. Okay, now the UN Charter. As I was talking about, this is a very, very important part. The United Nations UN Charter is what we call as the foundational treaty of the UN. This is the document. Uh, this is the document which established the United Nations, and it outlines everything: the principles, purpose, structure of the UN. Most of the bigger rules of the UN are mentioned in the UN Charter. Um, and UN Charter was adopted on the 26th June 1945. It is also called as the UN Charter Day. And the Charter actually came into force in October 24th, on October 24th, 1945. So the UN, that is known as the United Nations Day. That is 24th October. 24th October is not so far away. I think we should definitely do something together on the 24th October to celebrate the UN Day also together with each other. Is NATO a part of the UN? I think this is a very important question that you mentioned, because whether you have the NATO or you have, the G20 and G77s, um, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, African Union, European Union. Uh, so the idea is there's so many of these bodies. How do they relate to the UN? Uh, you know, even though they directly may not be at the UN, the dialogue that happens at the UN affects the dialogue at NATO and all these organizations, and vice versa. So all of these, since the members of NATO are also member of the UN, and the members of other alliances are also the member of the UN, uh, these are none of these organizations can operate in isolation. So they are all coordinating with each other, and and working together with a, a, a full autonomy. So NATO, UN cannot dictate to NATO what to do. UN cannot dictate to African Union what to do. Uh, but they have to work in consonance with each other, or with like in cooperation with each other. What is the view of the UN in the war that is currently happening between Russia and Ukraine? Most That's a good question. Most of the member states in the UN, they have condemned Russia for what they have done in Ukraine, and that again only happens through the discussions in the UN. So the General Assembly adopted a resolution, and time and again these issues are always discussed in the UN. um, Similarly, like, you should definitely visit the website of the UN, and they very frequently give these statements about these all these different issues. So you can always find a lot of these statements there, which are formal responses by the UN. Okay. So the purposes now of the purpose and objective, I think we've already discussed these issues: maintenance of international peace, promoting human rights, fostering socio-economic development, and encouraging friendly relations. That is broadly what the UN Charter, like in a summary, says. Um, I'm just trying to respond to some of the questions in the chat as we go along. So when countries sign treaties, for example, pay more attention to, okay, who holds them accountable? Is there a period of time to meet these objectives? Great question, Adrian. um See, the thing about treaties or agreements is that agreements are promises we make to each other. So if I don't fulfill my promise, who can hold me accountable is whoever I'm promising something. Uh, so who holds countries accountable is essentially each other. All of us are trying to hold each other accountable. And countries don't want the UN usually to have too much power over them. So when they are signing treaties, the treaties are designed in a way that countries have more autonomy, have more freedom which is a very strange situation because then nothing gets solved, you know. Uh, so this is a very, very tough situation to be in, that for the world to actually move forward on these issues, the world needs cooperation. But actually, if anything has to be done, some strictness is also required. If you have strictness, then countries don't want to join the UN. So that is why the inherent structure of the UN is a very weak structure as we understand it. But it is, UN is not, I always say, a magical body. Like UN is only as strong as the political willingness of all of the countries which are a part of it. So that is one reason, like that there's barely any accountability in issues like climate change, poverty alleviation, and so on. But is there a period of time to meet these goals? Yes. The Sustainable Development Goals, for instance, have a deadline of 2030. The Millennium Development Goals had another deadline very properly prescribed. And yes, the usually the aim of the UN is to create programs which are measurable, which have a specific deadline. But if we are unable to achieve them, not a lot usually can be done, because that is just how sometimes the treaties are designed. Is the UN related to the International Council for Harmonization? As I said, there are a lot of different alliances and international NGOs, bodies which work with the UN. Our organization works with the UN. UNISA works with the UN. So everyone's in a way, somewhere or the other, which is doing good work. They are all associated with the UN in some or the other form. Is Model UN held in the headquarters of New York? There is a Model UN that is held in the headquarters of New York. In yes, so there are Model UN conferences that do happen in New York. There are MUNs that are also happening in the UN office in Geneva, and there are MUNs which are happening everywhere around the world. So that is, Amara, like my answer to your question. How do UN resolutions or treaties differ from laws? Okay, wow, very interesting question. A UN resolution or a treaty, like a UN resolution, is also in a way, it has to be agreed upon the particular committee. So, for instance, the General Assembly of the UN will pass a resolution, or the Security Council will pass a resolution. It can technically be a law as well if it's meant to be a law within the resolution's meaning. Uh, a treaty, once again, prescribes several laws. Like one example can be the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which is the NPT, which discourages countries from having and using nuclear weapons. It is a law in effect in many ways. So thank you for bringing that question, because our next segment is international law. So let's move to and keep your questions coming. I hope that I'm able to, at least I'm trying to respond to as many questions as are coming in the chat. So I am once again, I encourage all of you to keep putting those questions and your perspectives. Uh, okay. Um, okay, I'll take this one question before we move forward, which is, what is diplomacy and how does it connect to the UN? Um, Diplomacy is how countries operate with each other, like how South Africa would interact with India in a bilateral way, that is between each other, and how all of these countries engage with each other is what we call as diplomacy. Diplomacy is how the UN got formed in the first place, because people got together to create the UN. That happens through diplomacy. Any agreement on anything happens through diplomacy. So diplomacy and the UN have a very, very deep connection. There's no UN without without any diplomacy. But diplomacy can exist without the UN. I'd actively encourage you to think on that line, that there's no UN without diplomacy, but diplomacy can survive without the UN. Uh, yeah. Uh, Next question is, UN is a platform for diplomacy rather than organization on its own. I think that that uh, is really one of the most key takeaways of our session that you and I we are discussing. So thank you for summarizing. I love that comment, honestly. Let me make a heart on it myself as well. Uh, it's a extremely well summarized point that UN is a place where diplomacy works. Within itself, it can hardly do much, really, honestly. Uh, how does the UN solidify the security of all its 193 members? Again, I think what it tries to do is it creates a space for dialogue. It creates a space um, for for conditions for peace. So in itself, it can't create security because once again, it is not just an organization on its own. It's a space where we all can decide to be secure or insecure together. So that is very important. And then, okay, yeah, exactly. Like, so essentially, the UN is in a way, is very subjective. Most definitely, I think UN is most definitely very subjective. Uh, does the UN have mechanism to dissolve or reshape itself? What a great question. UN definitely has a mechanism to reshape itself, and that is mentioned in the UN Charter itself. It is something what we call as the amend. I'm also just putting it. Uh, which is called as the amendment process of the UN Charter. I'd welcome you to like read about how the amendment happens. I think it's 110 Article 110, 111 of the UN Charter. So it can definitely change itself. Um, but the question is, does it want to change itself or not? And when we say that, again, can we now that you and I, we are understanding that the UN is operating in two ways. There's a staff which is running the UN, and then there are countries which are the members of the UN. In order for the UN to reshape itself, that is the job of the countries themselves to bring bigger change into the UN. So you have to remember that that can happen when we have global consensus. Smaller tweaks in the UN system, etc., keep happening, as per time. Like for instance, when the COVID-19 pandemic came, UN had to move towards technology. Like they had to do the video calls and all of that. For that, you don't need like the permission of everyone. But if we have to dissolve the UN, change the Security Council, all of that, of course, that needs consensus. Can it dissolve itself? Yes, it can. Mostly, yes. But again, the countries have to agree to do that. However, is the countries from BRICS not subscribed to the UN? Is the one. No, all countries in BRICS are a member of the UN. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, everyone's an active member of the UN. So I think BRICS, again, like I said, it's a BRICS, NATO, all of these people are members of multiple forums. Okay, let's go to the next slide. Um, okay, international law. Um, International law is what is the rules and principles which govern relationships, as I said, between states and other international actors. One example is like, can I? Last year, I had the most beautiful opportunity to be in Durban and Peter Maritzburg. And as I sat at the pier at Durban, I saw the ships kind of come in and go out. Now, when can a ship enter the South African territory? When can it reach Durban? That is all international law. When we apply for visa, whether we get a visa or not, that's international law. When we have the trade happening between countries, how much tax there is on that, how much duties to be paid is all international law. If somebody is committing international crimes, so all of these are critical parts of international law. And as the last line of this slide says, it governs the areas of diplomacy, trade, human rights, conflict, use of force, environmental protection, law of the sea. So there are so many aspects in which. Okay. Okay, one question in the chat is, can UNISA hold a model UN for its students interested? Yes. I can take the liberty, I think, with my dear colleagues Denzel and David. We will be organizing a model UN at the end of this course for all of you on climate change. So that will happen for sure. And all the different roles that we discussed at the beginning of this presentation, we would love it if you are all able to take on those roles and we can collaboratively build this model UN with each other. Okay. And once again, Amara, thank you for your comment. Let's move to the next slide, please, on international law. Sources of international law. Where do we find out about international law? What is it that, where is it that it says all of this? Um, International law is and you had in the chat somebody had talked about like treaties and law. So I'm again like now we are on that theme itself. So one is what we call as international treaties and conventions. These are formal agreements between states or international organizations. One example for climate change is Paris Agreement. Before Paris Agreement, we had something called as the Kyoto Protocol. We have something called as the Geneva Conventions, very, very important in conflict areas. Like one example I can give uh, is if two countries are fighting with each other, then what is the status of doctors in that area? What is the status of journalists in that area? So where is that given? It is given in the Geneva Conventions. So uh, so you have a treaties and conventions which govern all aspects of everything. If How does a ship operate? How do ships operate across the world? They operate through what we call as the Convention on Law of the Sea. So for all of these different places, you have different agreements. How does the UN work to foster peace within the international law space? What the UN does is, again, it can create a space for dialogue, and it can even suggest through certain experts what kind of solutions can be there. You also have something called as the international, I'm again typing that in the chat, something called as the International Law Commission. Law Commission is also constantly doing research into the emerging areas. Like for instance, you have something called as the UN Office on Outer Space Affairs, where you are now even looking into space law again. Okay. Um, right. Okay. Next, great question about COP29 in Azerbaijan. Do you think that they're really enforcing laws to multilateral companies? So here, because we are discussing international law, I'm I'll just say this very quickly to all of you. Please remember that if there is an international law and if there is a national law, then national law is the one which takes the first precedence. So, for instance, enforcing laws on multinational companies, it usually happens through countries. So if a country, for instance, on climate change wants to enforce principles and standards for climate change, in South Africa, it is the South African government which has the power to do so. So the UN only can what it can do is it can create principles with everyone, which can then give some direction to the South African government. But it is the South African government which eventually has to enforce laws on multinational companies. And then, the whole thing about employment, taxation, politics, revenue, so many things come into consideration when a country has to decide, like, how they decide to enforce laws with all these. Yeah. So that's one. I'll come back to the discussion point, treaties and conventions. The second is what we call as customary international law. This is a very important part of international law. Customs means practices which have been going on for a long time period. So they may not have been written as laws, but because they have been going on as customs for a while, they have become unwritten laws. That is what we call as customary international law. Then you have something called as general principles of law. So this means that there's certain principles like fairness, justice, equity. They are all like intrinsically a part of the legal system. Like for instance, one of the general principles of law is that you should always hear both the parties before giving a judgment on an issue, right? I think that's a standard sort of a principle of law. So that principle of law operates uh, even in um, even in the International Court of Justice, that you will always give the opportunity if one country brings a case against the other, before you pass a judgment, you will always ask the other country to give their perspective. Okay. Okay, customary international law, like one example of customary international law. Uh, it's a really fascinating example, very fascinating story. Is I think maritime law that we can take together. Like maritime law, which is how like countries are supposed to operate with each other in oceans, was entirely customary international law before it became uh, a written document. So, for instance, how many of you know what is the ocean boundary of a country? Like, what is how much if we are in Durban, then how many miles into the ocean does the South African border extend? You can just quickly put it in the chat if you want to. 12 miles. Uh, Okay. So it is actually 12 nautical miles, which is, I think, approximately, 12 nautical miles. So this 12 nautical miles initially started off with very less this thing, and how that was determined is how you will find it really funny, but like how far did your cannon's range was from the coast so you could defend it. So that is how initially your ocean boundary was determined. Because like it would be logical that you can only defend yourself till that boundary. um, so so it started with that, then it customarily increased to 3 nautical miles. There's a very famous movie on Netflix which came last year, which was also looking into that. Like after the 12 nautical miles issue, like 3 nautical miles, a very smart man, um, he decided to construct a platform just outside the 3 nautical miles of Italy. And they had a huge diplomatic chaos because that guy declared themselves a country, and they just had a lot of parties, and no laws were followed. So he used this whole customary law of 3 nautical miles limitation, and then UN had to change that entire thing and give a written whole thing, where they had to then determine it as 12 nautical miles. So that's one example I can give you of customary international law. I can give you one more quick example. Is like, safety of ambassadors. You may have heard that you cannot, like, even if two countries are at war, uh, even if two countries are at war, you generally don't, attack the ambassadors of that country which is stationed. So that came as a, you know, um customary international law itself. The movie that I'm referring to, for those who are interested, thank you for your question, is called as Rose Island. This is Yeah, this is the you may enjoy this movie. I know that's not what you were expecting, Netflix movie recommendations when you came to this course, but our course is, because it's Model UN, it will continue to like operate, address the whole world issues, including the I've typed it in the chat for those, the name of the movie. It's called Rose Island. It's a very entertaining one. You might even enjoy it. The final one, the source of international law, is what we call as judicial judgment. So like the Supreme Court, the International Court of Justice usually puts, these puts always these solutions through judgments, and whenever the conflicts arise, so those also become a part of the international law. But next slide, please. So now just summarizing the discussion that we have had, uh, international law. can be also classified into all of these different kinds of laws, which is human rights, humanitarian law, criminal law, trade law, law of the sea, environmental law, and finally diplomatic and consular laws. So literally, like every part of what how countries and individuals operate with each other is governed and covered under international law. Okay. So, and you can read more about it anytime you want to. Let's move to the next slide now. Enforcement. So, enforcement and compliance. So, you have the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court as two key laws. Which are key bodies which look into the adjudication and cases of international law. And then you have international organizations which have their own mechanisms to, like, you have the World Trade Organization looks into trade law. You have something called as the Tribunal for the Convention on Law of the Sea. So that tribunal looks into specifically like maritime law and so on. And there's a piracy court, interestingly, in Mombasa as well, which is a specific tribunal that looks into piracy related crimes, and it is in Mombasa. I didn't know it for the longest time, but I found it to be really fascinating. Okay, let's move to the next slide. Um, but for you all to understand international law, and this is the final like section we'll do, but before that, international law is a very important part of Model UN because literally what you can do, cannot do, works through international law. So I'll actively recommend you to start reading about what are these important laws, especially with climate change. Like read about the Paris Agreement and the Kyoto Protocol to begin with. They're very, very important. Um, okay. The one question is the UN can't enforce laws. So if so, how can ICC enforce laws? Okay, this is a very important question. UN, sometimes ICJ and ICC cannot enforce laws, but what they can do, if the matter is serious and the UN itself has consensus, is then the Security Council can act on that behalf to force countries into following international law. So one example can be Afghanistan, another can be Syria, something which what we call as, uh, I'm just again putting it on the chat, UN sanctions. So UN sanctions can be bans on, importing of weapons. UN can recommend freezing of accounts of the wealthy people. UN can worst case authorize interventions. And I'm just putting this in the chat for you to read about. This is called as R2P, which is called as responsibility to protect. Definitely encourage you to read about this R2P doctrine of the UN. Um, R It's protect, not protect. I'm not sure if I can edit this. No, it's responsibility to protect. So you can read about that, and finally, see what happens is that if 90, like if out of 193 members, uh, like let's say even if 170 countries are telling you to do something, it obviously has something called as a moral weight. Yeah, Sia, you've said like Israel Palestine. Yes. And in fact, I will also suggest you to read about this phenomenon which is called as uniting uniting for peace. Uniting for peace is something where when the Security Council fails to act on a certain issue, the General Assembly sometimes takes matters into their own selves and passes a resolution bypassing the Security Council. And that Uniting for Peace, what we call as UFP, has historically happened with Israel Palestine and most recently with the Russia Ukraine war as well. Um, Okay, one quick question here is ICC and Interpol the same thing? Not at all. Interpol also ICC looks at very specific crimes, which are a part of what we call as the Rome Statute. Encourage you to read about it. Um, Rome Statute is basically another treaty which looks into war crimes. ICC is the International Criminal Court. not the International Cricket Council where India is winning many cups, the International Criminal Court. There are four specific crimes which are uh, war crimes, human rights abuses, which are generally looked into by the ICC, the International Criminal Court. Interpol is a place where the police of different countries cooperate. They also look at issues like drug trafficking, financial fraud, cyber crimes, and so on. So quite a lot of these are what. So Interpol and ICC are different things, very very different things. Now let's move to the final part of our discussion because I know we are also very close to the closing time of our session. Uh, we looked at the United Nations, and I hope this session has been helpful for you to build a context of the UN. So let's go to the next slide very quickly. Firstly, what is a nation, right? A nation is made up of people with a strong sense of belonging, identity towards their country. Country, nation usually has common languages, religion, traditions, customs, and countries can be very big in size, and countries can be small in size. I think when I was in South Africa, like I found it fascinating to see Lesotho, right? Like Lesotho and like so many countries in South Africa. There was yeah, okay. You're not sleepy in the webinar for the first time. I'm very happy. Very happy. I'm quite excited at the how the next webinars are also going to shape up. And thank you for your honest comment there. So nations are a very important component, and nations really come together to create the United Nations, right? And then nations are responsible, as you all understand, for defense, education, healthcare, transport, and so on. So that is what a nation is. Um, One question always is a nation, can a nation and a country, they're two words, like are they any different from each other, right? um let's move forward. I want to give some time to David also to look at the platform and not delay you. Certain pillars of governance, again, you should know about these when you get a country assigned to you so that you can research accordingly. Governance, economy, security, education, healthcare, infrastructure, social welfare, and culture and identity. So these are some of the different pillars that a country is usually responsible for. I think in South African context, I've understood that electricity is a very very big like component as a part of specifically infrastructure, which really affects like people's day to day living. And I didn't know that like till the time I visited South Africa. So I have a lot of respect for all of you to manage with those challenges and yet like be here on our webinar. Really appreciate all of you. So this is pillars, different pillars of governance. And again, each of them I think are very unique to different countries how they deal with it. So let's move to the next slide. Um, After pillars, then we have something called as a governance. Um, uh, Governance basically looks into three different areas. One is what we call as executive, the other is legislature, and the other is judiciary. So executive is that branch which is looking into implementation of law. So your elected government is uh, elected government is called as executive. Legislature is what the parliament that makes the laws, and judiciary is the one that is judging on these laws. So please remember, in an MUN, when you're representing a country, you are representing the executive of that country, which is the government that is electing you. Okay, not the judiciary, usually not the legislature, but mostly the executive. Uh, okay, so that is something that you should always remember. It's the executive part of the governance. Next slide, please. Separation of powers. This is like what it means is that usually the executive, the legislature, and judiciary, they have separate powers, and that is to ensure that legislature and judiciary can operate independently to each other, and none of them can unfairly like affect each other. For that matter, one of my biggest discoveries in my time in South Africa was how amazing the Supreme Court has been. Like in South Africa, the kind of work the Supreme Court has always put in, and the way judiciary is in South Africa. So that was one really great learning for me personally. Next slide, please. Civil society. I think this is civil society is a very, very important part. You and I, we constitute the civil society. That's the people, NGOs, communities, advocacy groups, which independently operate from all of this. And there are four parts that we are looking at. Advocacy. Advocacy means to look into changes, social changes, like which are good for the country. Second is service provision. So, like looking into education, health, human rights, these kind of issues, engagement, so facilitating communities with each other, empowering individuals to participate in public life, and finally, monitoring and accountability. So these are some of the key aspects that a civil society is supposed to look at. So this is just to give you a sense of which are the other stakeholders besides government and judiciary that matter in a particular country. Next slide, please. Citizens, I think we all understand the role of citizens. South African elections have been so fascinating this time. Indian elections also, and now we have the elections in the US coming up. So we all know like how important the role of citizens is in deciding what a country does, right? So that is the role of citizens. Again, participation, advocacy, community engagement, and compliance, that is following the laws, because if we don't follow the laws, what is the point of having laws, right? So so now you can start thinking about, if you have no electricity, then what can civil society do, what can citizens do, what can judiciary do, what can executive do? And then once you know these stakeholders, then you can start thinking, how can we leverage the strengths of each of these to actually introduce social change, right? Because one stakeholder cannot do anything alone. It has to be like a collective movement forward. Last slide, I think, for today is media. I think, again, we all understand what media does, whether it's shaping public opinion or information, civic engagement. So, all of this is something that media is doing. And the most fascinating thing is that when the UN got started, you have to remember that there was no social media. So now social media has also come. So now I am on Instagram, politicians are on Twitter, different people are doing something on LinkedIn, and no longer do states only have the power to communicate ideas. Today, you can really leverage social media to put out your opinion, create movements, and I think the UN is still trying to understand how to deal with that. But media and social media now play a huge role in shaping the discourse. Okay, so I'll just conclude my presentation here. This is just a foundational like thing about society, about nations, about the UN that will be used. We can stop sharing now. David, thank you. That we can stop. So that will be useful for us to move forward and then start representing countries. So now when we represent countries at the UN, we know what we are going to really be representing. Okay, so thank you so much. All of you are amazing. So much, such a wonderful, engaging audience. I can't wait to hear from all of you and for you to take the quizzes. I'll just hand it over to David once again, and sorry for exceeding my time by a few minutes. So, David, over to you, please.
Thank you so much, Keshav. And I thanks, students. You guys were awesome. I see the chat is vibrant. It's happening. Things are flying questions. And I think you got a lot of answers too, guys. Keshav really knows his story, and it was really great having you guys on board. Okay, but of course, the most important thing on my side is I need to be able to show you guys how to get to the resources. So let me just quickly end this presentation. Okay, it's still running. So let me just quickly exit. There we go. Right, let me just reset my screen. Sorry, we are a few little minutes late. Okay, so the first thing you're going to do, guys, is go to adovh.unisa.ac.za. For those that weren't at the launch, you might not have seen these steps, so that's why we're going to share it with you, and I will post this in the chat as well. So it's adovh.unisa.ac.za. You'll notice there is a little login button on the right-hand top corner. And if you scroll down a little bit, you'll actually see all the different and really fun, exciting things that Adolf is actually working with and on and presenting. And there, of course, is the UN MOOC one as well. And thank you guys who've joined from today, being the 4th of September. And if I just go a little bit down, there is a page that says how to log in as well. This is an open platform, guys, which means it's not just for UNISA students. It's actually open for anybody. So the nice thing is you can actually join as a non-UNISA student, and all you need to do is when you log in, you're just basically going to say, no, I'm not a student, and you're going to create an account for yourself. In my case, I'm going to say yes. I'm just ignoring that message because I know I was on the browser and it wasn't working. And okay, and then I'm going to then log in. In my case, guys, because I'm a developer, I'm just going to quickly change my role as well, so it makes it look exactly how you would see it. Okay, so that's very important. So once you've logged in, you'll notice you've got your home, you've got your dashboard, your courses, and if you just scroll down again, it looks like the same page, but you will actually see all the courses that we have are listed down here at the bottom. And there you'll see it, the Union Module, United Nations, training, there it is. So if I go and click on it, what will happen is, in your case, if it's your very first time, it's going to say, do you want to join? And you just say, enroll me, and immediately the course will open. It's free, guys, 100% free. It's not going to be charging you anything whatsoever. All right, and then this is going to open like this, and you'll actually see all the information here. I did see people asking about recordings, so we'll also post the recordings here. It'll be probably here towards the bottom. We'll add a little page in for the recordings as well. So please don't skip anything. Start from the beginning. You'll see that the course flows just like you've probably had experience at UNISA with some of the modules. And there's, for example, the video, so you can actually go watch the video here in our LMS system, our learning management system, and then you can follow the course as well. As you go down, you're going to see Getting Started, which basically just outlines everything that you need to know about this course, the syllabus, the target group, how we're going to be doing this. So pretty much we'll be here on Wednesdays, thankfully at 5 p.m., not 6 p.m., different time zone, sorry for those guys, but yeah, definitely 5 p.m. You'll see the questions, the duration, so you've got to get an idea how much time this is you're going to need. And of course, you've seen the quality of the facilitators we already have on board, so, and I think you guys have really enjoyed this, so this is awesome. So please work through everything, make sure it gives you a nice green little dot indicating you've completed it, and it'll automatically do that, and then you can move on to the next activity. Introducing yourself, please do it, guys. Very important. You'll just scroll down a bit. We do give you the instructions explaining exactly what we want from you. And I did check earlier today, and I see there's quite a number of students who have already posted. So there we go. How do we participate? You're simply going to click on this button and follow the instruction that's been given to you. And I can see there are quite a number of students who even submitted today already. Actually, quite a number of them. So well done, guys. And I see there is a reply, so you can even go see what the other students are saying in the introductions as well. So please do this activity and then move on to the next one as well. Then, of course, as you go on, we're going to get to one option. It's called a reflective journal. So this is quite new, and you might not have experienced this at all. And let me show you how this works. So as you know what a journal is, guys, so it's something that you use, you write down, you reflect, you put it, it's sort of a personal space where you sort of go through the content and you write down the things that you're feeling, experiences, challenges, skills develop, whatever it may be. And we sort of give you a sort of an outline. So it at least gives you some structure. So you know exactly what you're going to be typing up or writing up. And this is actually how it works. And as I said, this is quite a new thing, so you won't really find this anywhere else. But once you've got an idea what you want to do is, you're not going to see anything here. Okay, this will be actually empty. All you're doing is you're going to go to Edit. Okay, so you're going to click on this little guy. It's a drop-down list. In other words, it gives you lots of options. You're going to click on Edit. The page is going to reload. Scroll down a little bit more. And then you can actually see it opens like this. So for example, if this was day 1, then I go write my comments down, and then all I need to do is click on save. And then automatically it will save everything I've typed in. So next week when I attend again, maybe I'm going to call it day 2. And then I'm going to write down some of my comments, whatever it may be. And then again, you will go click on save. So pretty much you're going to follow the same steps every time with your journal. You just click on the view option and you select edit. And then you can go and change it and update your reflective journal. So please do complete this. You'll see the instructions are given to you. Please go read it, think about it. You've learned a lot of information today and you've asked some really, really awesome questions. Go and do this activity. And as you go through this course, come back to it and actually update your journal as you go along. We'd really appreciate it. And I think you're going to learn a lot from this as well. And then, of course, you're going to continue with the rest of the course as well. Your quizzes, your forum activities, pretty much what you've experienced when you do your normal UNISA activities throughout the semester. So you can go do your quizzes and your forum activities. So please do those activities as well. Don't skip anything because you might learn quite a lot actually from all these different things. And there we go again. There's the reflections as well. And again, so we give everything to you. You just need to simply work through it. And this is really where you're going to start, guys. Thank you again for joining us this evening. I'm just going to see if Dr. Chetty is available just to do the closing for us. Yes, he is still online. Dr. Chetty, any last words
David,
from yourself?
There are a couple of points, questions about certificates and can they use this phones instead of the PC if they don't have it? If you want to take those as well.
Okay, in terms of the certificate, you would probably, it would go on to your, what we call the co-curriculum activities. So we do record this against your student record to indicate that this is the courses that you've been doing. So that's pretty much with all ADOF courses that we're offering. They're all part of what we call the co-curricular, and it goes onto your student record. You can use any type of device. If it's a laptop or a smartphone, you can use it. It's not a problem. Our LMS is very flexible in terms of that one. It's up to date as well. So yes, that devices, it shouldn't be a problem as well. Is that all the questions, Keshav?
Yes.
Okay, super. All right, so there we go. So thank you, guys. And then just to hand over for closing, we will ask Dr. Chetty to sum up everything for this evening session. Over to you, Denzel.
Thank you so much, David. I think this was an excellent session. I must actually say thank you to Keshav as well. Keshav, I should have actually mentioned right at the beginning and introduced you more formally. I just took it for granted that from the past launch that students knew who you were. But it's clear from your engagement with Keshav that Keshav is a lawyer by profession, and that gives you quite a good understanding of why he's so familiar with international law, as well as with and he also is a director of a international NGO, which has close relations with the UN as well. So that gives you a good idea of why Keshav is so well versed with both international law and the UN as well. So thank you so much for that, Keshav. It was clear that you were well versed in terms of the main elements for today, and I see that the students have really engaged with the session also in the chat, and I'm sure that we are looking forward for the next few days as well. In terms of the program, Keshav, I just want to make sure that you and David have actually confirmed when the next session is taking place.
No, David, will you be answering that?
Yes, I think it will be again next week, Wednesday, same time, and we will send a reminder email and an announcement through the MOOC site just to remind everyone of the next session.
Thanks so much, David. So, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, just remember next week, Wednesday. So this is a weekly session. Next week, Wednesday, we will continue the session with Keshav, and we look forward to an engaging session as well as we had today. And we know that by the time we finish the session, you will be well versed in many of the components that have been also articulated today. So with that said, we wish you all the best for the rest of the day and also for the rest of the week. And we will see each one of you. We look forward to seeing each one of you next week. But please also just remember that you have access to the site. So please do go on the site, look at the content, familiarize yourself with the content. And also, if you know there's other people that wants to join in, please feel free to bring in others as well. They will be able to catch up. So for that, thank you very much, and we wish you all the best. Thanks, David.
All right. Thanks, everyone, and have a good evening further. See you next week. Bye-bye.